Attention, you're listening to the Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Yes, my friends, I hope you had a wonderful Easter weekend, a nice Resurrection Sunday, my friends. We certainly did here. So it's good to be back at it here on this Monday. I want today... thinking here what I want to say to square this up. You may have seen over the weekend, you probably have seen by now, Trump's post on Truth Social, which I'll get to, that has some expletives in there. Usually they have some all caps in there as well, which they do this. It does, I should say. It has it this time as well. I'm going to read this, talking Trump basically telling Iran they have until Tuesday to basically open up the Straits of Hormuz, negotiate an end to this war, or there's going to be effectively hell to pay. So I want to talk about this today, my friends. I also want to square it up a little bit by talking about what happened at the end of last week and over this weekend, which I'll get to here in due course as we set this up today, my friends. If you, by the way, have any thoughts, questions, feedback, and, of course, adoration and praise for yours truly, you can send that via text, 317-785-1030, 317-785-1030. My friends, let's be honest. When your financial world starts getting a little more complicated, you need more than one-size-fits-all advice. That's where Full Suite Wealth shines. Their team specializes in working with families and individuals at your level, offering personalized guidance that goes far beyond the basics, from private equity and private credit to options strategies and coordinated legal planning. Full Suite Wealth helps you see the big picture and make confident decisions about your legacy. It's all about having a dedicated team who's there to guide you each and every step of the way so you can focus on what matters most: your family, your goals, your future. Want real confidence in your financial life? Well, friends, head on over to fullsuitewealth.com. That's fullsuitewealth.com. Build your legacy. Secure your future. Okay, so let's talk about this today, my friends. Late last week, I think it was on Friday, Good Friday, the United States had an F-15E shot down over Iran. Now, there's a couple of versions of the F-15. I like military aviation, my friends. In fact, we went last year to the Oshkosh Air Show, which I think I talked about on this program briefly. And there's plans to go this year as well. And it's supposed to be the granddaddy of all air shows. It's pretty incredible, to be quite candid. Has my favorite aircraft there, it's got everything there. We saw a B-1-2 Lancer. We saw an F-22 Raptor. They've got the F-35 Lightnings. They've got, you name it, they've got it at the Oshkosh Air Show. And if you've been to many air shows, you've seen a lot of these aircraft. You're undoubtedly, if you're into military aviation, you're familiar with the F-15. The F-15 is quite an incredible military aircraft. Its air-to-air capabilities is really, until the modern, whatever generation now that we're on, stealth fighters, the F-15s were they kind of ruled the skies. And most military aircraft, in fairness, from the United States does, because of our technological powers, the naval fleets and carrier groups and all this sort of stuff. And our ability to put a lot of firepower and support should we decide to engage in something along those lines. Just incredible capabilities. But the F-15 is a pretty amazing aircraft. Now, it's not our newer aircraft, but still, it has helped the U.S. rule the skies for some time. An F-15, there's two versions. There's a one-seater and a two-seater, meaning that there's some that have, two individuals on board, the pilot and someone, and I don't know if it's, in the F-14, it was called the rear, I forget the acronym, but it was basically for navigation and I think for systems, weapons management, and so forth. Anyway, F-15 has this on some of their aircraft too. They had one particular F-15 that was shot down by Iranian air defenses on Friday. So two pilots eject, both of them survive, but one of them was basically not recovered for some period of time. In fact, he wasn't recovered until Easter morning. I think it was after midnight on this weekend, Sunday morning. So aircraft shot down. We have another A-10 Warthog or the A-10 Thunderbolt, depending upon who's flying it, I think. It was also shot down. We had two aircraft that were shot down. By the way, and this is in a Todd Talk that I've just written for tomorrow, I believe, but Representative Seth Moulton from the People's Republic of Massachusetts said that this is apparently evidence that the United States is losing the war in Iran, which is totally preposterous, but I'm not going to talk about that here, but I talk about that in tomorrow's Todd Talk, which you can always get, by the way, in the Inner Circle, which is free for you. Just text TRUTH. You'll get the email every day. Text TRUTH to 317-785-1030 should you want to get that. But anyway, so we had two aircraft that were shot down. So one of the aircraft had two pilots. That was the first one to be shot down, the F-15E. The A-10 had one pilot. That was shot down, I believe, over the Persian Gulf. So that was more, I believe, a water rescue. They got the pilot, one of the pilots of the F-15, the one and only pilot of the A-10, but they did not immediately recover the pilot or the second person in the cockpit of the F-15E. And so the Iranians figured this out. There was a disinformation. Look, there's news reports on this that apparently there was a misinformation campaign by the CIA to make it sound like the U.S. had recovered this pilot to try to prevent the Iranians from finding him first. But the Iranians were looking for him, and the CIA, I believe it was the CIA, or that's at least who's, I believe, taking credit for this, were able to recover this pilot in Iranian territory. He apparently, again, news reports being what they are on something like this is rather difficult to know for certainty, but I've seen that there was, that this pilot had taken cover in a crevice in a mountain, and CIA agents or not operatives, but maybe some people who are assets to the CIA, or maybe some CIA technology helped locate this individual. And the United States was able to exfiltrate this second pilot safely from Iranian territory. Now, there's reports, or there were initial reports. I don't know. I'm just going to tell you I don't know, but there were reports that there was heavy firefighting with undoubtedly our special operations teams going in there to save this guy. And there was a firefight. We supposedly had taken no casualties. The IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, did take casualties, but we were able to save this pilot. So this, of course, doesn't set well with Trump. Trump announced on social media, we got him, meaning we recovered our pilot. And so shortly after that, I say shortly after, the day, hours later, Trump makes a post on Truth Social, which I'm going to read to you. I'm going to read you this. We're going to talk about this and just this and other things related to this throughout the program today. So, here's what he says. I can't read all this on the air, by the way, because this does have expletives. In fact, when I was first sent this, when I first was asked about this, my first question is this real? And of course, I thought it certainly can be. It's Trump that's posting these things. This, by the way, is not the sort of things that presidents would traditionally post or say publicly. It's not, but Trump has redefined this era that we're in. It's different. So I assumed that there was a good chance it was true, but I wasn't, or accurate, whatever. But I also realized that if it is accurate, that there's some things that need to be said about this. But let's first read it, and let's take it all in together here. He wrote this Tuesday. He wrote this Sunday. Tuesday will be Power Plant Day and Bridge Day, all wrapped up into one in Iran. There will be nothing like it. Open the... I can't say the word here. Open the effing strait, I guess is what I would say. You crazy. And I'm going to say this, if you've got young ears listening, and I know many of you do, it's a good way to learn about what's happening in the world. I'm going to use a word here that's not pleasant, but I can say it. I just want you to know the context. I'm quoting a presidential social media post from the sitting president of the United States. So if you got young ears, cover them in 3, 2, 1. He says, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. There we go, all caps with an exclamation point. Praise be to Allah is what Trump says. Now, a lot to unpack there. A whole lot to unpack there. Let's do that here. Let me first take a breath. It's a good place to stop. Let that set for a minute, and also remind you or ask you, are you tired of spending your hard-earned money at businesses that turn around and support leftist causes? If you are, that's exactly, my friends, why we created Freedom Marketplace. That's a free, searchable directory of businesses that share your conservative principles, conservative values. These are businesses that have vowed not to support leftist candidates, leftist causes, and you can shop these businesses that are pushing in the same direction as you are very easily. Just head on over to freedommarketplace.net. That's freedommarketplace.net. Liberty and business for all. Okay. So a lot to unpack there in that post on Truth Social. What is Trump getting at? Well, first of all, Trump has given several ultimatums to the Iranian leaders, the government, the lunatics who are responsible for creating this tension, turmoil, violence, and so forth. The people who chant death to America, death to Israel, the people who call the United States the great Satan and Israel the little Satan. These people, not the people of Iran, but the leaders, the Ayatollahs, the folks who are responsible for governing the Islamic Republic of Iran, the people who want to usher in at least a regional caliphate, and probably, if they're being candid, a worldwide caliphate. These very people, these are the problem. These people are the problem. Trump has given them an ultimatum. Look, we're trying to negotiate an end to this war. The lunatics running the Islamic Republic of Iran, have tried to wreak havoc on other countries that have nothing to do with this war that's happening. They're trying to, lots of things. They're trying to create problems for the United States and Israel by launching attacks on some of these other. They've basically lost their ability to do that, but they are still shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. And this is where approximately 20% of the world's oil flows through. And so this, of course, is what's contributing to the high price at the pump. I noticed we have a vehicle that's diesel. It's here in Indiana between, I don't know, I think I've seen it $5 up to close to $6. I've seen $5.60 something, I think. And I don't know what regular is right now, but it's still not cheap as well. So this, of course, causes problems in a lot of ways. It hurts the global economy. it's there's a lot that stems from the price of oil that we can't get to on this program, but it's a cascading effect. And so Trump is saying, look, this is unacceptable. Trump has tried to recruit other nations to actually protect ships going through this region, saying if you just decided to protect these ships, you wouldn't have, this problem would be solved. And of course, many nations are reluctant to do that. Instead, just letting the petulant rulers of Iran carry on like lunatics and doing what they're doing in the Strait of Hormuz. Trump said, listen, you have until Tuesday. I've given you 10 days ago. You might remember that I told you were going to have 10 days. That day is Tuesday. Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern is what is being reported. Or I think it's in the social, maybe in the social media post. That's the deadline. So that's, tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Trump says, listen, if you don't have this opened up, we're going to have power plant day. We're going to have bridge day. It's going to be all wrapped up into one for the Iranians. And there's going to be nothing like it. I'm not messing around. You've been warned. Open the blanking strait, he says. You crazy. Yeah, I told you what he said already, or you'll be living in hell. That's what he said. Just watch. And then he says, praise to Allah. Praise be to Allah, which is Trump mocking them as I read it. In fact, my son saw this and he said, what does he mean by this? I said, I think he's basically mocking them. They've got an Islamic Republic. The Islamic Republic sits as a theocracy with the God of the Quran. I'm just explaining in terms how they would frame it, but the God of the Quran, Allah, who's in charge of effectively, as the Ayatollahs would tell you, of governing the nation of Iran. And so Trump's basically saying, it kind of reminds me a little bit, and please don't put words in my mouth. I'm not saying Trump, I'm not comparing Trump to this biblical character. I'm just saying the scenario reminds me of this. Do you remember in the Old Testament, in the book of Kings, 1 Kings, I think, I want to say it's like chapter 7. I'd have to go look. But there's a prophet named Elijah. And Elijah goes up to Mount Carmel, and he challenges the prophets of Baal. The prophets of Baal, of course, are, these folks are enemies of Yahweh. They've established themselves as people who are going to not serve the one true God, but instead they're going to worship and lead others to worship a false god named Baal. That's how I've always said it anyway. Baal. I've seen it pronounced a lot of ways. Baal, I think. I just say Baal. I don't know if that's correct. That's what I've heard most pastors say, but others say it differently. Regardless, the story goes that Elijah, the prophet, goes up to Mount Carmel, and he basically has a showdown with the prophets of Baal, and he says, listen, here's what we're going to do. We're going to both talk to our God. All of you prophets, all of you hundreds of prophets, and there's a number given in the story of First Kings. I don't have that open in front of me. I'm telling you this from memory. He says, listen, you guys go and you can go first. We'll put an altar, we'll put a sacrifice on the altar, and you can call down for your God to consume the sacrifice. And so they go about their business, these prophets of Baal, lots of them, and they're crying and they start cutting themselves and really starting to increase the dramatics. And so does Elijah. Elijah says, well, your God hasn't done anything yet. Perhaps he's sleeping. Maybe he took a vacation. I mean, he really starts laying it on thick. Maybe he's in the restroom. Things like this. He's mocking them. He's mocking them. And eventually they give up. And he's, all right, are we just going to accept that your God is just taking the day off or whatever? And so Elijah takes his turn. And now Elijah goes over to the altar, and he really ups the dramatics here. He has a bunch of water dumped on top of the sacrifice. In fact, there's trenches around the sacrifice, and there's so much water that they've dumped on the sacrifice that it's run out and it's filled these trenches that are around the edge, or the perimeter, if you will, of the altar. And so Elijah prays to God, and God sends down fire and consumes the sacrifice and also consumes the prophets of Baal. I'm not saying, I know people have a problem with this. I'm not. In fact, my wife sent me something the other day that someone in the Christian, the Christian evangelical world, I guess, had said about Trump, making comparisons or using at least comparative language to Trump and Jesus as far as similarities to things. I'm not doing that here. I'm not saying Trump is Elijah. I'm just saying it just reminds me of the situation where I think that's what Trump is doing. I think he's basically saying your God isn't going to be able to save you from what we're going to unleash on you if you don't open up the Strait of Hormuz. So that's where we are. Still a lot of unpacking to do, my friends. But we're going to do that, as I promised you, over the remainder of the show. I want to talk about, there's some people out there saying that this is a war crime that Trump is calling for. I want to talk a little bit about that. There's other things I want to get into as well. But that being said, it's about time for me to take a time out. Not quite, though. My friends, if you're dealing with discomfort, or if you're tired of living off prescriptions and managing those side effects, you are not alone. A lot of folks are looking for something natural they can trust. That's why I think you should check out Christopher's Organic Botanicals, a family-run natural kratom company rooted in truth, tradition, and transparency. They partner directly with farmers in Indonesia. They lab test everything before it ever reaches your hands. There's no hype. There's no synthetics. There's no funny business. There's no garbage that they sell. That happens with a lot of these other shady sellers out there. But Christopher's provides the real thing done right. You can do your research on their website or elsewhere, and once you're comfortable with the product, once you think it's something that you want to start with, you should begin with the Kratom Starter Pack, and you can use coupon code Todd Huff to save 10% on your first purchase. Again, that's coupon code Todd Huff. Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. That's Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Coupon code Todd Huff. Truth, tradition, transparency. And yes, my friends, time out for me. You're listening here to Conservative Not Bitter Talk. I'm your host, the one and only, the ever so beloved Todd Huff. Back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. All right, so let's talk about this post. Let's talk specifically about this allegation here that some are out there levying, that this is Trump calling for what effectively will be viewed as a war crime. So again, I'm not going to read the post again, but I am going to talk about the details of that. So, Trump has basically put Iran on notice, and he says, look, we are not going to be playing games here anymore. We're not going to allow you to basically create some sort of a blockade to prevent oil from traveling through the Strait of Hormuz. That is not acceptable. You start interfering with our energy, we're going to start interfering with your energy. We're going to start impacting your ability to fight back even more. We're going to completely cripple you militarily for decades to come. It's going to be, as he said, like you're living in hell. So the conditional threat is this: open the Strait of Hormuz, or you're going to deal with these consequences. So, some people are saying that this, if he carries this out, I've seen this said, that this would be considered a war crime. Now, of course, listen, people are going to say what people say about Trump. People have claimed he's done all sorts of evil things that are basically war crimes already by his mere existence. So people, this is not new. But let's talk about the legitimacy of this and what this really means and what Trump can legally do. So we know that the Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's main oil choke points. It's very, very difficult. It's a very, very difficult area to navigate if people don't want you going through there. The way that the waters, it narrows, and there's also a bend, right? It's not wide open waters. It's small enough to where you can choke it off, and there's some navigating because it's not just a straight shot, through the waters. And so 20% of the world's oil is believed to travel through here. So he's basically telling Iran, you're already imposing major economic damage by performing or creating this choke point in the Strait of Hormuz. And we're going to put pressure on you. First, I'm going to put it on you verbally, because remember, we talked about this before a lot. We talked about a book called Sun Tzu's The Art of War. That's a lot of what's going on here. I don't know. This is actually, I would say, one of the good things, I think, really good things about Trump's presidency. It makes people uncomfortable. I don't so much care about that. I do, to within a certain amount of reason. But this is how you have to deal with these madmen. You have to be prepared. You have to be prepared to understand that there's levels to this, right? There's the official statements, there's the negotiations, there's the just the realities of what they're really doing behind the scenes. All these things going on. Trump is not making it easy. Trump's keeping them guessing, which is one of the strategies of Sun Tzu's The Art of War. That's what you want. You don't want your enemy knowing exactly what you're up to, dictating the timetable and the language and all that. You want to keep him guessing. You want to keep him stretched thin. You want to keep him confused. You want to keep him on his toes. And listen, I think that's one thing. I'd like to think that that's one thing we could all agree on, that Trump would keep our enemies on their toes. So Trump has said, listen, I have to apply pressure here. I have to apply overwhelming pressure. It's got to be something that they really don't want to have happen. And if I threaten to take out their bridges, their power plants and so forth, that's certainly something that they don't want to see happen in their country. So, but it also doesn't mean that it's just words, right? Trump may have every intention of following through with this. So this is not random words or random targets either. Power plants and bridges, these are infrastructure targets. And infrastructure targets are relevant to military objectives. So when you think of bridges, you can think of troop movements or logistics or getting fuel from point A to point B, transporting weapons, just internal mobility for whatever capability Iran has or hopes to continue to have or reestablish during this particular war. Power plants, the same thing. Now, power plants, you can say the same for bridges too, depending upon what these targets are. It's hard to say that something is strictly used for military purposes within a country versus civilian purposes within a country. So when you look at power plants, that affects electricity. That electricity can be used, of course, to power civilian homes. It can be used to power hospitals. It can be used to power water systems. But it can also be used to power military communications. It can also be used to power air defenses and military command support. And so these are legitimate, at least historically, I would say, these are legitimate military targets. They're not purely civilian. If you target civilians, strictly civilians, if you're targeting them, then it's something that absolutely can be a war crime. But at the same time, if it's part of the military infrastructure, it's viewed, at least historically, different. And it's for the people saying out there that this is obviously and clearly a war crime, they're jumping to a conclusion. I would say they're jumping to a conclusion that they want to be able to use for political purposes. We know what we're up against here. It doesn't matter what Trump says or does. They make the boldest claim possible. In fact, I forget who said it, but someone was once, heck, it might have been like Goebbels or something. A lunatic Nazi. One of these crazy lunatics basically said, if you're going to make a lie up, don't make it a little bit believable. Make it just over the top, because at some point, as often we say, in fact, I've said it before, that's too unbelievable, right? Truth is stranger than fiction. You can't make this stuff up. And if it's such a bold claim that it seems even too far of a stretch for the fiction writers to come up with, then there's something almost a little bit counterintuitive, really, that says it's more believable because someone who's trying to make up a lie wouldn't go so bold. And so there's a lot of people out there. Who want to use some of this thinking and framing of things to say that Trump is committing, if he does this, a war crime. And it's way too premature to say that, especially when we know that these things can be used as military objectives. So, Trump threatened infrastructure. This is important to understand, and we know this. For the people who are rational, you already know this. You understand Trump. You know that you take him seriously, but not literally. The press, the Democrats, the people who throw a fit, who hate him, take him literally, but not seriously. We go through this a lot. I didn't come up with that. Of course, I shared that statement. We talked about it even last week. So he didn't threaten some random schoolyard. He threatened infrastructure, something that's critically important to Iran's military capabilities. So that doesn't, listen, war is terrible. So I'm not arguing saying it's good, it's clean, that there's no negative consequences of this. That's not my point. What I am saying is that this makes the case legally that at least reasonable people would conclude that, hey, he's trying to win a war, achieve a military objective here, not target the civilian population. So, and you got to think about it this way. If the rule was you couldn't target a nation's infrastructure, most modern wars would be illegal basically immediately. It's one of the first things that happens. So the question is whether the target has military value and whether civilian harm would be excessive. There's a lot of people in Iran. Of course, there's been tens of thousands that have been killed by their own government recently, but they actually want the United States to take out this maniacal, evil leadership. Doesn't mean that they want these other things to happen, but the question is, how much will they understand this? Will we get to this point? Is this Trump trying to get leverage? Time will tell on this, my friends. Speaking of time, I'm at the end of time for this particular segment. Got to take a time out. You're listening here to Conservative Not Bitter Talk. I'm your host, Todd Huff. Back here, my friends, in just a minute. All right, my friends, third and final segment of this episode of the Toddcast today. If you want, by the way, to catch up with everything we've talked about, if you're unable to listen to the full program, if you want the links, the background information, if you want the shareable version of this program, if you want content that we get into that we don't have time to discuss here, you can become a member of the Inner Circle. It's totally free. You can text the word truth to 317-785-1030, 317-785-1030. So, two things here. One, friends, I'm going to we're going to pick up here and kind of conclude what we've been talking about here today. The other here is that I want to tell you that one of the biggest challenges that you have as a conservative, as a principled conservative, is finding ways to ensure that your values align with what you do, including how you invest. That's why I love what the team at 4-8 Financial is doing. They specialize in biblically responsible investing. That means they screen out companies that do not align with your faith and your values so that you're not funding things that go completely against what you believe in. They will do the heavy lifting for you so that you can align your investments with your purpose, your goals, and of course, your values. The best part is that they'll help you find out how your current investments, let me say this, what you currently have now, how those align with and reflect your values. All you have to do is take a couple of minutes to complete a quick and easy assessment. Head on over to 48financial.com/Todd. Again, that's 48financial.com/Todd. 4-8 Financial, because your money should work for your values, and certainly not against your values, my friends. Okay, so I mentioned before the break that people are saying that if Trump carries this out, it's going to be some war crime. I mean, this is just the way that Trump is what Trump does is framed, how Trump's personality and actions are discussed in the media. Everything he does is, of course, illegal and wicked and evil and vile and everything else. That's the narrative, the way that they go about this. I do think it's important to point out some things here. Infrastructure has been targeted repeatedly in modern war. In fact, U.S. operations in Iraq included attacks affecting electrical systems and other infrastructure. NATO's 1999, that's under Clinton, their air campaign against Serbia also included bridges and power-related targets. Both of those things, by the way, drew a lot of legal and moral criticism. And it doesn't mean there's not tough questions or that the lines are never crossed or that this is simple and easy. That's not my point. But these things have this is what happens in war. It's not a new category of war. Trump isn't creating something out of whole cloth. I would say strategically, Trump's not going to target, take away, even if you think he's a terrible person that doesn't care about the people of Iran, I think strategically, he knows that there's a huge percentage of the Iranians that are cheering for the United States to do this. And maybe if they're not cheering openly, because they live in fear and oppression, and they've watched tens of thousands of people who have wanted to see freedom, who have wanted to see an end to this particular maniacal regime. They've seen what happened to them. I think they're cheering quietly. Trump knows that he has allies, a lot of allies in Iran. So it wouldn't even make sense. It wouldn't even make sense to do it strategically. So it's not a new category. This is not something Trump made up. The United States and its allies have often made arguments about dual-use targets when they wanted to have some freedom operationally. Listen, it's all how you frame this. You can say, well, they want to have an excuse for doing this, or they want to give the justification. Well, it makes sense that if you're trying to defeat someone militarily, you have to be able to take out their infrastructure, their command and control, their ability to use energy, to transport fuel and weapons, and to move troops around. You ought to be able to take out the bridges and so forth. I mean, this came on the heels. They, shooting down our aircraft, which on the one hand, I mean, if you're Iran and you're at war with us, you would think, well, they're trying to fight back or whatever. But from our side, listen, we've done what we wanted to do. We're trying to negotiate an end to this thing. Don't be shooting at our aircraft. I mean, we're trying to protect our people, as we should. Obviously, this has to be said for the lunatic left out there. So that's what's going on. It's again, the left wants to frame anything Trump does as something illegal, immoral. But this debate goes way, way back before Trump. And Trump says oftentimes the quiet part out loud. And he says it sometimes in language that's ugly, or maybe ways that the vast majority of us, maybe all of us, wouldn't say. But at the same time, I think we understand what's going on, and bringing an end to this war and bringing stability and peace to the region and freedom. Again, our job isn't to free the world, but I'm just saying these are good benefits. Freedom for people who have lived under this oppression and so forth. Have an ally to be able to operate without having to worry about being nuked by its neighbor. Israel's worried about Iran constantly having a nuclear weapon and so forth. This is much deeper than what these leftists want us to believe. But I gotta go. SDG.